I was also going to say, hopefully us sharing our experiences will show you that even industry insiders will experience skin irritation, whether or not by our own doing or have had in the past. So you should feel like this is not, we've all been there and probably will be there at some point.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the Chemist Confessions podcast. I'm Gloria.
And I'm Victoria.
This is a human conversation on all the skincare science we talk about on the daily. And today is kind of an unusual episode because Victoria and I got talking and we realized we've covered a lot of actives, a lot of potent skin stuff, which means that inevitably we've tried a lot of potent skin stuff. And that usually means you might end up in unwanted skin irritation town. And today we're going to dedicate an episode to, okay, I tried one too many things, or I don't know what's going on, but my skin has freaked out. And what do I do?
Yeah. And before we get into that, I should address the elephant in the room. As you can see, the podcast room is no longer out of commission, but looks different. So got an upgrade. But yeah, I think as far as this topic, a lot of people will encounter this scenario because we all just get too excited with all of the good actives out there. And the goal would be to simply be like, if you're in this scenario, this is what you should do. And hopefully this is what you can expect. But yeah, so excited to get into it.
All right, let's dive right in. First things first, let's start with, okay, I woke up, my skin is red, it's itchy, it's stinging. It is not happy with whatever I just did to it. So the first thing first is, this is kind of a no-brainer, but you should absolutely dial all the way back in your routine. This is just statistics. First things first, the number of steps you have means more ingredients, and more ingredients lead to higher irritation potential. It's just statistics. Even the most vanilla ingredients can have a chance of irritating your skin, especially when it's in a compromised state.
One of the best examples is Vanicream as a brand. A lot of times, if you go to the dermatology office and you deal with any sort of skin sensitivity, irritation, skin condition, you are most likely going to get pointed to a Vanicream. And if the reason why is, if you look at the ingredient list, we often talk about how this cream is very industrial. The ingredient list is very minimalistic. This is why, reducing the amount of potential culprits to figure out and hopefully get skin back on track, but then add back the right ingredients into your routine.
Yep. And when we were putting together this episode, we thought, some of them may sound like common sense, but we did dig into the studies to kind of show some context of what we mean by your skin is not itself right now, and it needs some tender loving care. Yeah. I pulled a couple studies. The studies are more aimed for people with skin conditions like atopic dermatitis or eczema and psoriasis, but I think it's a pretty good snapshot of what your skin is like when the barrier is compromised. So the first one, they looked at pretty standard things like tool or transepidermal water loss and skin hydration. What they did is they measured compromised skin versus healthy skin in terms of tool or transepidermal water loss, skin hydration, and they also patch test with SLS or sodium lauryl sulfate. This is a surfactant that's pretty standard in terms of when you want to induce a certain level of skin irritation. But like we always talk about in terms of actives, concentration is key. In this study, what they did is they patch tested with a bunch of different concentrations of SLS from 0.5 all the way up to 20% to try to get a skin reaction to see what that critical irritation concentration is between healthy skin and compromised skin barrier.
One thing that is really interesting about this study is that they actually tested it on two sites of the skin. They did on the forearm, but they also tested on the nasolabial fold. And I actually was really interested by the nasolabial fold because a lot of people who don't necessarily have skin condition, but are more prone to irritation, this general area can be actually a really reactive site. So actually for me, that's like my patch test site to know if things maybe don't agree with my skin.
Yeah, that's a good point. I call it my Jafar zone, which is the mustache area all the way down to the chin. This is definitely more reactive. Anyway, so in the study, they had 3 study subject groups. It's about N equals 30 per group. So not the biggest test, but it's about 30 people with atopic dermatitis, 30 people-ish with rosacea, and 30 people with normal healthy skin. And I'm just going to put the results on the screen. It's not super surprising to see that tool is much higher in those with atopic dermatitis and elevated for those with rosacea compared to the healthy skin. What I find interesting is it's not as big of a difference as you might think. So atopic dermatitis, we're looking at a tool of 23.6 with healthy skin averaging out at 16.8. So this just to show that tool is such a key measurement in terms of your skin overall health. And it's pretty sensitive to different skin conditions.
Yeah. And again, for those who might not remember what tool is, you're basically trying to measure how much water is evaporating out of skin through this measurement. And that gives us a good idea of, honestly, your skin barrier's integrity. Is it ability to keep water in? So it's not just necessarily hydration, but your overall skin barrier health. It's a good indicator. So the other thing I thought was kind of cool is there's quite a difference between your forearm skin and your nasolabial fold. This might sound obvious for some, but as you can see, different sites of skin react differently and behave differently. And it's a good reminder of that.
Yeah, this is kind of a fun factoid that's not directly relevant to what we're talking about today, but they showed through the study that those with rosacea, their skin condition is much more localized to the facial area. Whereas if you look at tool values of their forearm, they are on par with those with healthy skin. While people with atopic dermatitis still have that elevated transepidermal water loss even on their forearm. So now moving right along, looking at the irritant potential of SLS on these different skin types, you can see that even going up to 20% within the healthy skin group, half of the people never even reacted to the highest level of SLS, which is not surprising. And those with atopic dermatitis have the most reactive skin, reacting as low as 7 out of 30 of them reacting as low as 2.5% of SLS versus 20. So you see that's quite a range of tolerability with ingredients. Again, while this study is looking at people with very specific skin conditions, when your skin is experiencing irritation, that inflammation, compromised skin barrier is the common theme with people with skin conditions. So this is why even though you might have products that you've been using a long time without an issue, and all of a sudden when your skin has a flare up, you're like, I don't know what to use. Even my go-tos seem to be a little bit iffy. This is a good illustration of what is happening.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one other stat that I found interesting just to wrap up this study is that they have a line here and they mention how there was no difference between the three groups in the number of positive subjects. However, the total number of positive reactions was 2 times higher in AD than in healthy skin and 3 times higher for rosacea subjects. So, I think that part just kind of shows like when skin is compromised, that is when the number of reactions, the degree of reaction, all of that comes into play. So hopefully that just solidifies how much, we try to harp on the integrity of the skin barrier and how much that matters. So yeah.
Yep. So we have one more study here to showcase this very stating the obvious. Your skin is not itself blind. I just find this to be really interesting because this is not the type of studies that we typically come across.
Yeah.
In this study, they have 3 pretty small groups, but with interesting takeaways. They have 18 patients with atopic dermatitis, 6 with chronic plaque psoriasis, and 14 healthy control subjects. And what they did is a very again, it's a type of study that we don't share a lot on this podcast. They basically induce irritation by pricking skin with 0.1% histamine. They measure physically the flare and wheal, or like the bumpiness that results from it, and the ring of redness that resulted from this irritation. And they also had the study subjects themselves rate the irritation level from 0 to 10. And what I find really interesting is they tested patients with AD both on the active sites and visually normal patches of skin to see the difference between the lesions and the non-lesion parts. I'm just going to go ahead and put the result on the screen. I find the data presentation to be very detailed to a point of it's not very helpful on the eyes.
It's so funny you mentioned this because I think back to our last episodes where we were talking about hypochlorous acid, and some of these bar graphs was 0 arrow bars, and you're like, I'm pretty sure that arrow bar is pretty important, but it's not there. And this one, it's like all I can see are error bars. Like you cannot make out the data points whatsoever.
Yeah, and what's really crazy is this part. So the first chart I'm putting up is is people's self-assessment on the itch rating.
Hmm.
And the x-axis is from 0 minute when the prick happened all the way to 20 minutes after the prick to see how the itchiness flares up and dies down. But what this chart shows me is they are basically asking people to give a score like every 10 seconds. It is really dense. It's like a bunch of dots. They're like, are you itchy now? Give a score. Are you itchy? Are you itchy? Can you tell me how itchy you are? I'm like, this has got to be the most annoying test on planet Earth. But what's really interesting is you can clearly see the prick that happened on AD lesions have the quickest flare up and the highest itch rating. And the die down it just basically lingers compared to the other groups that goes practically down to baseline by the 10-minute mark.
Yeah. I also thought it was fascinating how much more itchy the AD lesion skin area is compared to their non-lesion site, which actually performed, it was even less itchy than the control group. And I think that also speaks to kind of like the neurological aspect of these skin conditions, because for those who don't have eczema, I'm sure the itch probably feels like it's a degree that you're not used to. But then you think about these AD people, there's some psychology there about their non-lesion site being, that's not itchy because I'm used to a level of itch that is on a completely different level. So it's just like fascinating psychology to me.
Yeah, like I really want to share this study because it's just done in such a different way. Like we talk a lot about general irritation, what to do, but this is not a sector we really looked into, like how people try to quantify these reactions and play into the psychology aspect of it. So super interesting.
I was just going to add one more thing. I think the other thing that Gloria and I, because we, a lot of these skin conditions really venture into derm areas, so we don't get to talk about a lot of these types of studies in particular, but itch is actually a really challenging thing to study because there's a perception aspect that's really hard to measure. But it's actually such an important part of the skin concern because that itch, the manual scratching, only adds to the difficulty of a compromised skin barrier. So to be able to tackle itch, as much as it sounds like, I think to some people it just doesn't sound all that important in terms of reduction, but to be able to manage that is actually a really big part of managing eczema. So I just shout out and want to pinpoint to that aspect. And I don't think people realize like how important that is sometimes. I have a daughter that has eczema, so this is why I have to talk. I have to put it out there.
With the part of data that's more linked with, self-evaluation, they also have an objective part of it where they measure the size of the flare and the bumpiness. And what I find really interesting is those with normal skin actually has bigger flares than those with lesions and people with AD on their non-lesion skin. It's almost like your skin had it too good. So when something abnormal happens, it's like, whoa, I don't like it.
Even more dramatic, right?
Yes.
You're going to laugh, Gloria, but when I read this study, I actually thought, man, this is definitely a study that Gloria would never sign up for because I have seen Gloria have mosquito bites and reactions. I'm just going to put it out there. Gloria cannot refrain from itching. It's like to such a degree that I feel like you would do so poorly in this study.
I will be the worst control.
Worst nightmare. Yeah. Anyways.
So while these studies are actually looking at actual skin conditions, when you're having reactions, when you're going through an episode of skin irritation, the skin response is honestly pretty relatable and very similar. It's all heightened sensitivity, compromised skin barrier, and general inflammation. This is why you should cut back your routine to something really basic, and even products that you've been using perfectly fine, especially active ingredients, you should cut back on those as well because your reaction to the same ingredients might be different during this time when your skin should be recovering. So here is how we would suggest you do this. The way we see skincare landscape, there's so many products to go through, but generally everything slots into one of these buckets. It should be cleanse, moisturize, sun protection, and actives. In this scenario, the easiest bucket for us to talk about is actives. Just cut out all the big ones. Just take a pause on most of the major ones. Your AHAs, your retinoids. Yes, Victoria?
I'm raising my hand, but question, Gloria, for those out there. What is considered an active since you're talking about this subject?
Why, Victoria? What a great question. I think this can be a loaded question in itself. right? Very generally, actives are ingredients that give you that long-term efficacy that products are claiming. So things like retinoids that have a biological effect, that interact with your retinoid receptors to boost collagen production, this and that, yada, yada, yada. But I realized that that definition gets a little hazy when you're talking about, even things like hyaluronic acid that's supposed to be hydrating but can have a long-term skin effect.
Mhm.
In our context between Victoria and I think we generally consider much more aggressive, more aggressive might not even be a good word here, but
I think in the traditional sense, I would say
mhm,
anything that's actually going to basically help with a morphology change, like
yeah,
anything that's, anything that involves cell turnover, anything that involves, a mechanism that's outside of skin barrier help. So
hmm
that's things like tackling hyperpigmentation, wrinkles. We consider that just a more traditional definition of an active. And for me, I would say those are the ones like we generally recommend for people to refrain from, because to be honest, it's not even from a sensitivity or reaction standpoint, but it's also because your skin is in this kind of angry situation. You cannot expect that those actives are going to be able to interact with those mechanisms or be able to perform in those to give you those benefits just because skin is in this state. So it's almost like two purposes. It's both for, the skin irritation part, but also almost like to save, it's almost an economical standpoint. It's like, why waste, the product at this time when your skin really just should be focusing on skin barrier health and getting better.
yeah, that's a really good point. So things like retinoids, AHAs, vitamin C for me, even through irritation, I'm generally okay with.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, that's something you might want to cut.
Yeah.
Something really vanilla or seemingly vanilla like niacinamide can also be a personal choice. But
Yeah.
some people do experience niacinamide irritation, especially because products use such high levels of it now. What we would say probably fine, again, like Victoria mentioned, is more of the skin barrier or instant hydration type of ingredients. We wouldn't consider things like glycerin, hyaluronic acid, petrolatum, butters, waxes, ingredients you need to cut, or even ceramides or soothing ingredients. Soothing ingredients can be a bit of a toss up as well. They should be helping in the situations, but sometimes planty stuff can be complex. So again, this can be a little bit skin type dependent. So that's generally how we would classify actives to cut versus ones you can leave in your routine.
I was also going to add, like, there's a lot of weird plants that get claimed as soothing with like no backing. So it kind of feels like a big mystery bag. So I would say refer back to some of our blog posts that talk about soothing plant extracts.
Yep. Next, cleansing.
Mm.
Stay on course for the most part, but you could, if you're having a particularly bad flare up, you could potentially go down to just cleansing with water. Refer back to our episode 136 where we looked at the question, well, can you cleanse with just water? And generally speaking, unless you are putting on something heavy duty like long wear makeup, really hardcore sunscreen, performance sunscreen, water can do a pretty decent job all around. And when your skin is going through those episodes, you probably wouldn't want to use those products anyway. Next, moisturizer. Victoria, when you're going through an episode, do you stick with your normal moisturizer or do you have a go-to switch out, boring, industrial Vanicream type product?
Okay, I should preface with, we're going to get into this now. I should preface with my skin is not very reactive, and I just don't know if it's because it's been hardened by the years of being on acne retinoids for as long as I have. But I will say that I'm generally fine with continuing the use of my moisturizers. Yes, and my main moisturizer staple being Mr. Reliable. But I will say that for my toddler daughter with eczema, she actually will simply go down to an Aquaphor in those needs. And I will, for let's say I overdid it on the exfoliant sometimes in pairing with retinoids, I actually will have our balm or a salve around just to spot treat certain areas if I feel like there's a dry patch. But that's it for me. I don't really go out of my way to have like a vanilla, like Vanicream moisturizer of sorts.
Yeah, so this can be dependent on your skin type. I am a little bit more reactive than Victoria in
Yes.
general,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't consider myself as someone who's super sensitive either.
Mm.
I also use Mr. Reliable. For the most part, I stay coarse with my moisturizers. But if it's a really bad one, Mr. Reliable does come with 2% niacinamide, and I'll get into it more a little bit later. But that's an ingredient that can be a toss-up for me when I have a flare-up. So sometimes I dial back to like a La Roche-Posay Tolerant or Lipicar as a backup. Something really, really simple. Not the bestest texture on earth, but something I know that even if my skin is having an absolute crap day, it's fine. It's that vanilla. So
I think that's like a top tip for people who do have reactive skin is if you have not spent the time, something that's a worthy experiment is finding your fallback moisturizer.
yeah.
So that way, like base healthy skin, what it's perfectly fine with, so that you don't spend that time just in your angry skin state trying to hunt and experiment with moisturizers. Once you get to that point, then when you're experimenting, that actually will get a lot more challenging because skin is just not itself. So top tip there if you want to spend some time experimenting.
And the last part of skincare that can be very difficult when you're experiencing an irritation flare-up, sun protection. How do we feel, Victoria?
Okay, so sun will make your skin irritation worse, hands down. The UV will actually cause it to flare in terms of hyperpigmentation. It can make that spot darker. So in terms of general care, it is a thing to consider. Sunscreen formulas, though, there is some stickiness there. There's not really a clear-cut way. If you don't care about aesthetics at all, our recommendation would actually be to consider a baby sunscreen. That's going to be super white cast, high particle size, mineral, because they're meant to be just that vanilla. So if you just absolutely do not care, but need a sunscreen, that would be your go-to. You can try to incorporate the sunscreen you do use, but just something, I would say that's something you can keep in mind, just keep tabs on and monitor, because the use of sunscreen with sweat and the reapplication, there's just a lot of factors that can really add to your skin irritation issue. Third thing is, if you don't want to deal at all, I would say just buy a really good hat. If it's on your face,
hat.
Yeah, UV protective clothing, gloves, whatever you need to like get through that period of time, I think is all fair. All things you can consider.
Yeah, for me, I can't, when I'm having a flare up, I do find a lot of sunscreen formulations to be a little bit challenging.
Yeah.
I go the hide and dungeon approach usually. My typical go-to, if I use like something like a Biore Aqua Reach, that's typically okay. I have found that sunscreens for me, my skin is not super sensitized by filter system, but that's me. A lot of people can have sensitivities in terms of particular sun filters. So this is just kind of like our go-to troubleshooting if your OG sunscreen is not working out during this episode.
Yep.
So that's it. This is how we recommend going about cutting out certain products, minimalizing your routine when your skin is very mad at you. These are some of the steps we recommend and how to approach skincare. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, let's talk about, after the episode, how do you put your routine back together. Speaking of humectants, we have to slot in a quick blip on our humectant champion, Aquafix. Knowing us, we research like hell for the right blend of humectants based on their benefits and size to cover all your hydration needs.
It also comes with a heavy resume of soothers, so use this to boost your hydration game, pair with your heavy-duty actives, or just add it in to maintain happy skin.
Please use the code CCPodcast2025 for 15% off your first order. Okay, so now your flare-up is good. It's in the past. I think another question before we dive back into adding the pieces back in is, how do you know your skin is Gucci with you now?
Yeah, I think, first of all, there's no good time frame. Severity, degree, area, where it is on your body, all of those can factor into length of time needed. But I think, first of all, the itching, the scaliness, the redness, all of those factors should be subsided. I think it's normal, at least for me, with general skin irritation, those general patches sometimes are darker or lighter. Like pigmentation, at least for me, is a big thing. So I think it's okay to have a little bit of that. But those are, I would say, visual cues of what would constitute as, skin that's ready to take on another product or a new product.
Yeah, for me, my telltale sign is definitely just when the visual signs have gone away, and I tend to have sensation when I have irritation, so stinging, like general, just bad vibes. But after skin feels it's ready, I would usually give it another couple of days before I try to go back to a normal routine.
Yeah.
So putting it back together, it kind of depends on why your skin flared up in the first place. By far the easiest scenario is you introduce one thing or something new to your routine and then your skin freaked out. More than likely it's that product. So you can basically just go back to your normal routine without just not using that one. That's by far the easiest scenario. We would say mid-level is your skin freaked out when you're switching up a lot of things or you're introducing like 3-4 things. It could be one of those things, or it could be just the combination of all those things. What we see a lot happen is when someone has a pretty set routine and they're like, you know what, I'm buying a whole line of new products. And then you switch out everything from cleanser to sunscreen to actives. Now you have no idea why your skin is in the red.
Yeah. And I think what you'll see here and in our advice, the general theme too is also don't count out your skin history. And that's also like the products that you used previously, like all of that data is going to be really important to build this routine that hopefully is not going to give you trouble again. So that's the goal here. And I think a lot of times people forget. And I think we have to remind people, it's like, try not to be swayed by what you read or hear about, because everyone's going to sell you the next miracle product that saved their skin, but ultimately the value and what's really going to solve your skin issue is understanding what happened in your skin history. And it's also why Gloria and I, when a lot of people come to us asking us for advice on what they should do, we ask them 20 questions, because their personal skin history is what's actually going to clue us into a meaningful next piece.
Then we have the worst case scenario, is you change nothing. And then skin decides just to give you the 2 middle fingers and have a flare up.
Yes.
That's definitely the worst case scenario. And this is pretty difficult to troubleshoot. Some of the common culprits in that scenario is something like, do you have too much niacinamide in your routine? Niacinamide can be really vanilla, but because it's in a lot of products and some dedicated niacinamide products and have really high levels of it, sometimes your skin wouldn't immediately have issues with that, but over time that can be too much. On a similar vein, it could be you're ramping up your actives and it's just too many actives, too many things. That can happen a lot when you're working on tackling hyperpigmentation. These type of products tend to be loaded with a big blend of ingredients, and that just kind of catches up to you. Second thing that could happen is maybe something have expired. Skincare expiration is not something that is always closely monitored, but most skincare products out there have high loads of water, high loads of good oils, good fats, things that tend to go south after some time. Every product comes with a, good for 3 months after opening, 12 months after opening, so on and so forth. But, us, we are dabbling in new products, trying new things, and we have these bottles in the back burner that we don't get to on time. We tend to forget when the products were first opened, so maybe something expired and you have to kind of revisit when those products are first used. Some other factors that might have happened is you have things like excessive sun exposure. You might not have a full-on sunburn, but just being out in the sun a lot might have caused some irritation or something that changes how your skin reacts to your products.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that is tough, and I felt like when Gloria put the high-level traits together, all I could feel was age and other things that are just outside of her control, like diet, hormones, potentially development of new allergies. And a lot of this just comes with age. There's different phases our skin goes through in life. there's certain life scenarios that can really throw your skin, that can throw a wrench in your general skin health, like pregnancy and postpartum. So just accepting that there's certain things that it's not anything that you did, and it's just the way skin behaves. Hopefully that gives you an idea of where to start in your kind of like detective mode, in trying to figure out skin irritation.
Yeah, in the worst case scenario, we recommend trying to put your routine back together one step at a time. It can definitely be more cumbersome, more case by case dependent. Just some patience with your skin and just kind of rework it. Chances are you still have a lot of good products that you can still use, but just adding one product back at a time, give it a couple days up to a week to make sure this is the product that your skin is still happy with, and go from there. What might be tempting now at this point, especially if you're in the last bucket of like, I haven't changed a thing, my skin's just pissed at me, is now you might be in an ultra detective mode and you want to find the ingredient that caused the problem. We want to say that unless you can absolutely go to your dermatologist and try to do an allergens patch test to see if you can narrow down your culprit to something specific. But we will say this might not be outside of that very specific scenario. This might not be the most fruitful rabbit hole to go down by like going through ingredient lists yourself. And here is why.
Gloria's absolutely right. And usually, if you start dabbling into what's giving your skin some heartache, you're going to end up looking at things like preservative system and fragrance. They're probably the two most famous culprits of skin irritation. But you'll also notice that when Gloria and I talk about this topic and our general content, we don't actually point fingers necessarily at these two. And the main reason being that it's simply such a broad category of ingredients, and especially for preservatives are so key in good skincare formulation, that it's going to get a bit messy if you're going to try to figure out which one is the problem. And Gloria found a really great paper to kind of give you more context and explain why that is.
Fragrance contact allergy is actually super well documented.
Yeah.
In the particular study I pulled. So I kind of did some digging into fragrance-induced skin irritation. This is actually pretty well documented. Statistically speaking, we're talking about massive studies that test thousands of people to see how fragrance may cause irritation. And the incidence rate, you can see numbers as high as like 10% of the population may experience irritation. You might see that and go, wow, shouldn't all skincare be fragrance free then? 10% seems really high. I will say, first of all, 10% is on a very high end of incidence rates for these types of studies I found. Sometimes some can be as low as under 1%, some hovering around the 1%, depending on how it's tested, what the carrier is, this and that. But in my digging around, I found that generally speaking, there are studies that look at very specific fragrance components, and then there are studies that use what they call fragrance mixture 1 and fragrance mixture 2. It's a very generic name given to actually a very specific blend. Basically, these are blends that's comprised of very, very common fragrance components that may be the issue. So I'll put the composition up on the screen, but basically, fragrance mix 1 has been used for decades, and this is kind of the standard test substance, basically. And this is a mixture of 1% of each of 7 synthetic substances, which includes amyl cinnamol alcohol, cinnamol, eugenol, geraniol, which are common ingredient names that you might see on your INCI list, hydroxycitronol, isoeugenol, and oak moss. And all this is mixed in petrolatum. This is actually a pretty big range. It is very unlikely that you'll find all of these in your fragrance mix. But a lot of fragrance, you might see something like geraniol or eugenol like listed specifically in your INCI list. But more than likely, you're actually just seeing the INCI name fragrance, because fragrances are complex and it could be just a blend of you don't know what. And the reality is, because these 7 that I just listed have been used for decades as common irritants, these are well known. So a lot of fragrance mixtures in the back end, in the fragrance houses, they can work around these or without these, or make sure these are at the lowest possible level, because again, at 1% of each, it's really high. It is very, very, very aggressive. So again, I hope this just highlights how complex it is. And because they feel like fragrance mix 1 doesn't tell the whole picture, they created fragrance mix 2. This has 6 synthetic fragrances in the concentration between 0.5 and 5%. And you have ingredients like citronellol, citral, cormin, hydroxy isohexyl 3-cyclohexene carboxylaldehyde, farnesol, and alpha hydroxycinnamol, and all in petrolatum at a total fragrance component concentration of 14%.
Fragrance concentration, these are not normal concentrations used in skincare and personal care. Like these are like even 1% is actually quite high. So I just want to point that out there. Like if people feel like, oh, that's how much is in your product, definitely not. So I just want to, this is for the purposes of their study and to figure out, I guess, to elicit a reaction. Yeah.
And in the study, I found they, outside of the standard fragrance mixtures, they try to look at certain components isolated. And it's very clear that some components are worse than others. For YouTube watchers, I'm going to scroll through this table very quickly to give you an idea of how complex it gets. All I can say, the best way to describe this table for audio listeners is it's a big ass table. It is very, very long. You have more common things like isoeugenol at a concentration of 63 ppm, which is very low, in deodorants can lead to allergic reactions in 3 out of 13 sensitized patients. Sounds really high, but these are patients, again, already experiencing skin irritation or already identified as fragrance sensitive.
So subset of the subset, guys.
Yep, exactly. And then cinnamol at 320 ppm in deodorant can trigger allergic contact eczema in 2 out of 8 sensitized patients. Again, subset of subset. This is to give you context of how complex it gets. So again, if you highly suspect it's something very particular, it does not hurt to go to your derm and say, hey, I would love to get, some sort of panel to find the culprit. But otherwise, you sifting through your own ingredient list gets really messy and likely not very fruitful.
So hopefully through this study, we've been able to give you some context as to why no one's really solved skin irritation. It's meant to be there as a defense mechanism, right, for our organ that is the skin. So with that, we just want to remind everyone that if you find yourself decoding and you're starting to get lost in the weeds, I would say DM us, find us. We're happy to help try to put some logic and help you troubleshoot. But ultimately know that at the end of the day, the most meaningful step you can do in terms of building back your routine and getting skin back to normal is minimize, then patiently rebuild stepwise, so that you will then realize what are your fundamentals, your core products that you can rely on, and then you'll be able to expand out of that. You need an anchor in order to get yourself back to the routine that you want to have and focus on all of those exciting skin benefits. But with that, hopefully that gives you an idea of a rubric to build off of. But we are going to take a quick break. And then after that, get into our top tips, our personal top tips.
Woo!
All right.
It's the Animal Fun Fact Corner. And it's not me today. I'm excited. Hit me, Victoria.
All right. So based on my Costco, Halloween is almost here. So with that theme, I'd like to actually tell you about one of the initiatives. I don't know if you know of the Bureau of Land Management that the U.S. has, but basically they're a very tiny government agency. They're tiny. They actually show their org chart and everything. I think it's not more than like 30 people. But this agency actually manages 245 million acres of public lands and 700 million acres of mineral estate. It's a huge project for a very small agency.
Get them more funding. That sounds like a terrible job.
Probably not going to be successful in this administration, but whatever. So I'm putting them in the spotlight because every October, they actually host a virtual Bat Week. And so what they do is they basically have a virtual bat photo contest where they will post on their Facebook and Instagram and ask people to vote for what they believe to be the cutest one. And these bats they actually want to spread awareness about the importance of bats for our ecosystems in the States, how much of an impact they have on public lands. And a lot of the photos are actually taken by their own agency staff that they submit. And I thought it was really wonderful. I will share some of their the stats on bats for, our environment. They talk about how bats actually have such an impact on our agricultural crop because of how many insects they eat. They eat moths, beetles, aquatic insects, and flies. And they talk about how a single bat will actually eat its body weight in insects every night. So they're very important to the general health of our food crops. But all that to say, and the reason why I feel like I had to share this with Gloria is because the 2024 Bat Beauty Contest winner, his name is Harry Potter and the Guano of Fire. And I will put his photo up for your enjoyment. He's a very handsome bat. And if you're wondering why his name is Hori, it's because there is a bat species called the Hori bat.
Sorry.
I know. The name is crazy.
I have seen, I have read, I am not ashamed to say, I've dabbled in Harry Potter fan fiction, and that name hits too close to home.
The name is wild. So it's actually normally found in Canada, but clearly has spread to some of our regions in the US. And probably one of its characteristic features is that it is very hairy. It's quite fluffy. And probably the other thing to know is that the females are 40% heavier than males, which is fascinating. It's quite large. So that's really it. That's all I wanted to share is, look out for the Bat Beauty Contest coming in October. And if you are curious about what native bats are local to your region, we'll share a link called batcon.org that you can actually filter out your regions and you can see how many species are. And I thought it was fascinating because in California, there are actually 20 species. Yeah, so definitely take a look.
Harry Potter. I love it.
And the guano of fire.
I'm so impressed by the pictures, by the way.
Yeah.
They are really, really, I think wildlife photography is just so special, and the people who have the patience and the passion to take these pictures, amazing. So definitely check it out. I think bats are adorable, and I have an also unreasonable fear of bats from that one Reddit post I read about how some of them may have rabies.
Yes. Yes. I mean, yes, you hear a lot of, they don't have great marketing, not great PR all around, but yes, they're so important. So yes, I agree. Yep.
Okay. Let's wrap this up. And in this last section, we're just going to share basically our own journeys with skin irritation. Given our jobs, we test a lot of new products, and not just ones you see on the market. We test our own lab creations. We test other people's lab creations. And some of them, can be half-baked around the time we start testing them. So it may lead to irritation. I'll go first. I have, on the product side, I have over niacinamide before. That is one of the weirdest skin reactions I've had. I was basically testing a bunch of new products, and I've never been irritated by niacinamide before, didn't think about it twice. It's really, really a simple ingredient, very vanilla. I wound up basically using a cleanser, a moisturizer, a serum, a this and that. Like basically 4 products, all with niacinamide and all with kind of high levels of it. And one day I woke up and I just had scaly, dry, really itchy skin. And I had no idea what's up with that. I've also gone too deep with retinoids. People who listen to podcasts for some time know that I'm pretty retinoid sensitive in general. Definitely dove in too hard, too fast one time. I don't know what I was thinking. It was like basically the first time I've ever used retinol. I'm like, 1%? 1% sound like a good idea. And, outside of the normal, retinization is normal. We're not saying freak out with every little signs of irritation, but it got to a point where water was staying in my face. Yeah. It was not good. I did not enjoy that. And one of the side things I had to deal with when I go through these episodes is that I have a cat. Some of you might have seen him on the podcast before. I am allergic to cats. Most days, it's very easily manageable. It's a mild allergy. But when my skin, again, compromised skin barrier, them cat danders get on my face, then it's really pissed at me. So that's my skin history.
I think the niacinamide irritation is fascinating because I agree. It's very unlike most skin irritation scenarios. I would say for me, I've also actually experienced that. And what was very eye-opening is actually niacinamide in cleansers because in my mind, theoretically, I feel like it makes sense. When you've got detergents and then you've got an active, it feels like for me, it was very revealing that I had too much. And you almost encounter like a warming, almost like touch and like sensitization that happens. So, I think that's where you just want to really clue in and kind of get a sense. I would say niacinamide, salicylic acid is a really big offender in terms of getting put into a lot of things for oily skin. The other ingredient you can look for oily skin types is salicylic acid. That tends to get sprinkled into a lot of oily skin products. But as far as for me, I kind of hinted at it before. I don't have the most reactive skin, but I've definitely over retinoided before. I think the only advice I really have here is for those who over retinoid. I think I can speak to that very specific case scenario. I usually will dial back the frequency. I don't actually go cold turkey. And so what I mean by that is if, let's say, you're suddenly feeling like this retinization is starting to feel a little too much for me, I will quit retinol only for a few days. I'm talking like 5 days. And then we'll try to figure out what is that general frequency. I don't stop because I find that when you go cold turkey, you're kind of almost just continuously repeating the retinization process and you're kind of stuck in that cycle. So for that specific scenario, I would say, you want to manage the retinization. Salves are really important here. I find blended salves, Bon Voyage again, 1% ceramides. It's a really great, handy little, nifty product. But any sort of salve will really help in terms of minimizing that flakiness and just, ultimately providing that protective barrier help.
Yeah, 100%. And for me, because I have such a history of difficulty with retinoids, I am pretty good at not overdoing it now. But the couple times I did, it was so bad. I was like, abort. Yeah. Even though I know, like Victoria said, I will have to start over later on. But it was just like at that point, it was too terrible all around.
Yeah. Hopefully you don't get to that phase. I'm hoping there's like an in-between phase where you're already like, this is starting to get to a realm of, I don't know if my skin is going to like me putting on this next night of retinol. So hopefully by that point, you don't need to get to that point.
Learn from my mistake. Don't do that. Slow and slow is the name of the game.
I was also going to say, hopefully us sharing our experiences will show you that even industry insiders will experience skin irritation, whether or not by our own doing or have had in the past. So you should feel like this is not, we've all been there and probably will be there at some point.
Yeah. For me, once I hit that irritation town, my go-to is I will cut almost all actives out of my life. I mentioned earlier, vitamin C tend to be still okay. But that's me. I tend to not have issues even when my skin is mad at me. But for the most part, my routine goes down to just Aquafix, so a soothing hydrator layer, plus vitamin C, plus or minus vitamin C, and the moisturizer. And the moisturizer is the one that it kind of depends on how bad the scenario is. Mr. Reliable is typically okay to use through irritation, and it's totally fine. It has a soothing component. But in the few incidences when I over-niacinamide myself, I have to move away from Mr. Reliable. Tolering and La Roche-Posay Cica Plus tend to work pretty well for me in even the roughest scenarios. I know Victoria mentioned that her daughter will go down to just straight like Aquaphor. For whatever reason, even though I have dry skin, if I'm just using something super petrolatum heavy, I haven't gotten to the point where I'll live through that texture yet. I will use our Bon Voyage to spot treat if my symptom is dry flaky skin. I will use a salve to kind of dab around the area. The really red itchy spots like my Jafar zone under my chin, I will also dabble a balm. But that's it. Sunscreen, I tend to go the cheating route of just avoiding the sun.
Yeah, I think the only thing I have to add is I am actually one that would avoid vitamin C. I find, and that's because I use the 20% ascorbic acid formulas. I tend to avoid those types of formulas. And what I mean by those types is things in solvents or at low pH. Like ascorbic acid is going to be at a much lower pH than normal. But like, for example, a lot of the Ordinary's products are in solvents. They're going to be in propanediol, propylene glycol, things like that. And I find it's a category I generally like to stay away from at that skin, in that skin state. So
That's a good.
yeah.
I was gonna say that's a really good point because that's something that I think the ordinary has popularized. When your skin's irritated, just know that glycols in general can enhance skin penetration, which is honestly not what your skin needs when
Yeah.
it's irritating.
Yeah.
So that's something definitely to flag.
Yeah. But yeah, hopefully this is helpful for those out there with skin struggles. There's always a mystery component of this where skin is just so personal. And a lot of times you are out there looking, trolling Reddit threads and, reading social comments, and you can just feel like nothing is working. And again, I would say seek out, it may be time to team up with a derm. Please feel free to contact us as well to help kind of do some skincare sleuthing for you. But, again, diligence to go stepwise, to have the patience to allow skin to heal. These are all qualities that are really important in hopefully getting your skin back to where it needs to be or where you want it to be.
Yep. So that's it for this episode. Let us know if it's helpful. If you have your personal anecdotes to share that can help someone else out, your go-to when your skin has issues, let us know in the comments below, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye, guys!